At some point, almost every app you love starts to feel worse. Not broken, not unusable, just worse. More ads, higher prices, more steps for things that used to take one click. And the strange part is, this doesn't happen randomly. It doesn't happen because companies suddenly forget how to build good products. It happens because the system they operate in pushes them in that direction. And once you see that pattern, you start noticing it everywhere. Think about the apps you use every day. Streaming platforms, food delivery, ride-sharing, shopping, even the tools you use for work. Now think back a few years. Weren't they simpler, cheaper, less annoying? There's this strange feeling that something has shifted. Not dramatically, but gradually, almost quietly. The kind of change you don't notice day by day, but when you look back, it's obvious. And what makes it more confusing is that technology hasn't gotten worse. It has improved. Everything should be faster, smoother, more efficient. And yet, somehow, the experience feels heavier. I started noticing this across different platforms, and it didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like a pattern. Not a bug in the system, but the system itself. So let's break it down. There's a moment that I can't stop thinking about. It's small, almost forgettable, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. You open an app you've used for years, something familiar, something that used to feel effortless, and nothing is obviously broken. It still works, the buttons are still there, the features are still there, but somehow it feels heavier, slower, more annoying, like something invisible has been added between you and what you're trying to do. And you can't quite explain why. And the uncomfortable question that follows is this: when did this start happening? Because it wasn't always like this. There was a time when these platforms felt almost magical, when everything just worked, when using them felt like gaining time instead of losing it. And now, it feels like the opposite. Not enough to make you quit, but enough to make you hesitate, enough to make you feel that something has changed. And here's the part that really bothered me. This isn't happening to just one app. It's happening everywhere. Streaming, delivery, shopping, even the tools we use for work. Different companies, different industries, same feeling, same slow drift from this is amazing to this is fine, I guess. So I started asking a question that felt simple at first, but got more uncomfortable the deeper I went. What if this isn't a coincidence? What if the reason everything feels like it's getting worse is because it's supposed to? Hey, welcome to Money Patterns. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and if you've ever had that quiet feeling that the tools you rely on are somehow working against you, you're not alone. Because what looks like small annoyances might actually be part of a much bigger pattern. And once you see it, it changes how you look at almost everything. If that sounds interesting, consider subscribing. It really helps support the channel and gives me the chance to keep digging into stories like this. Because the truth is, these platforms didn't just accidentally become worse. They followed a path, and it always starts the same way. And once you realize that these platforms didn't just appear out of nowhere but followed a path, the next question becomes a lot more uncomfortable. What happens after they win? Because there's a point where a platform stops trying to earn your attention and starts assuming it already has it. You don't notice it right away. It doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like convenience. You open the same app every day, not because you consciously choose it, but because it's already there. Your preferences are saved. Your history is remembered. Your habits are built around it. It knows what you like, what you watch, what you order, where you go. And slowly, without any dramatic moment, it becomes part of your routine. I've caught myself doing this more times than I'd like to admit. Opening an app out of instinct, not intention. Clicking through options without really comparing anything else. Not because it's the best choice, but because it's the easiest one. And that's when it hit me. Lock-in doesn't feel like being trapped. It feels like being comfortable. There's no barrier keeping you in, no contract forcing you to stay. Just a quiet accumulation of small conveniences that make leaving feel unnecessary. Or worse, annoying. You'd have to set things up again somewhere else, relearn a new interface, rebuild your preferences. It's not hard, but it's just enough effort that you don't bother. And that tiny bit of friction changes everything. Because from the platform's perspective, this is the moment where the relationship shifts. When you're no longer evaluating them, you're relying on them. Your behavior becomes predictable. Your presence becomes stable. Your subscription becomes something that renews automatically, often without a second thought. And when millions of people behave like that at the same time, it creates something incredibly powerful: certainty. And once a business has certainty, it starts making different decisions. It doesn't need to impress you anymore. It doesn't need to over-deliver. It just needs to avoid pushing you away. That's a much lower bar. And the strange part is, you don't feel the shift as a single moment. You feel it as a slow change in tone. A feature you didn't ask for. A price that feels slightly higher. A small annoyance that wasn't there before. Nothing big enough to make you leave. Just enough to remind you, you're already inside. And once you feel that subtle tension, that sense that something is slightly off but not enough to make you leave, that's when the system reaches its most powerful phase. Because now, it's not just adjusting, it's optimizing. Not for you, but around you. I didn't fully understand this at first. I thought these changes were just messy side effects of growth. More users, more complexity, more things breaking. That seemed reasonable. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized something unsettling. These systems weren't getting worse randomly. They were getting better at something else. Every small change started to feel intentional. Not obvious, not aggressive, but precise. The kind of change that doesn't interrupt your experience, but gently reshapes it. A recommendation that keeps you scrolling longer. A button placed exactly where your attention naturally goes. A delay that nudges you toward a paid option without ever forcing you. It's subtle, almost invisible, but once you notice it, it's everywhere. And what makes it so effective is that it doesn't fight your behavior. It studies it, learns from it, then quietly adjusts around it. You don't feel controlled, you feel guided. And that's a very different thing, because when a system is optimized at this level, it doesn't need to be better in the way you expect. It doesn't need to be simpler, cheaper, or even more enjoyable. It just needs to keep you engaged, keep you moving, keep you inside. Think about how often you open an app without really deciding to. How easily you move from one piece of content to the next. How rarely you stop and question why something is being shown to you. That's not just good design. That's behavioral engineering. And the uncomfortable part is, it works. Not because you're careless, but because the system is built to align with how you already think, how you already decide, how you already hesitate. It doesn't force you to stay. It just makes leaving feel like the harder option. And at that point, the platform doesn't need to compete anymore, because it's no longer just a product you use. It's an environment you exist in. And once a system stops being something you simply use and starts becoming something you exist inside, it begins to operate very differently. Because at that point, it's no longer just improving, it's optimizing. And optimization sounds like a good thing. It sounds like progress, efficiency, smarter systems, better outcomes. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized that optimization isn't about making things better for you. It's about making things more effective for the system. And those two things are not always the same. What struck me wasn't any single change. It was the consistency of direction. Everything started to feel like it was being quietly tuned, not for simplicity, not for clarity, but for performance in a very specific sense. How long you stay, how often you return, how much you spend. And once those become the primary metrics, everything else begins to rearrange itself around them. I started noticing how certain actions felt slightly encouraged. Not forced, just easier. A recommended option placed exactly where your eyes naturally go. A default setting that nudges you towards spending more without ever explicitly asking. A flow that removes friction from paying, but adds just enough friction to stopping. And what's unsettling is how natural it all feels. Because the system doesn't push against you, it aligns with you. It studies patterns across millions of people and then quietly adapts. It learns where hesitation happens, where attention lingers, where decisions slow down, and then it adjusts those moments. Not to help you decide better, but to help you decide faster, in a direction that benefits the system. And the longer you stay inside it, the harder it becomes to separate your choices from the environment shaping them. You start to feel like you're in control, while being guided at the same time. That's what optimization really looks like at scale. It's It's not loud, it's not aggressive, it's precise. And over time, it creates an experience that feels smooth on the surface, but subtly tilted underneath, where the easiest path is rarely the most neutral one, where convenience is carefully designed, not freely given. And once a system reaches that level of refinement, it doesn't need to get dramatically worse. It just needs to keep getting slightly better at using you. And when a system becomes that good at guiding behavior, the question is no longer how it keeps you in, it's why you don't leave. Because at this point, nothing is forcing you to stay. There's no lock, no barrier, no rules stopping you from walking away. And yet, most people don't. I've asked myself that more than once. Why didn't I just delete the app? Why didn't I cancel the subscription the moment it stopped feeling worth it? The answer was never dramatic. It was always something small. I might need it later. It's not that expensive. I'll deal with it another time. And somehow, those small justifications were enough. That's when I realized the trap isn't built on control. It's built on hesitation. Leaving requires a decision. Staying doesn't. And that difference matters more than we think. Because over time, the system quietly trains you to avoid that decision. It becomes part of your routine, part of your default behavior. You don't actively choose it anymore. You just don't interrupt it. And that's a powerful place for any system to be. From the outside, it doesn't look like a trap. It looks like normal usage. People still open the app, still pay the subscription, still engage with the product. Everything appears stable. But inside, something has shifted. The relationship is no longer based on value. It's based on inertia. You're not staying because it's great. You're staying because leaving requires effort, because it would take time to find an alternative, to rebuild your habits, to step outside of something that has already shaped your routine. And the system depends on that. It doesn't need to be the best option anymore. It just needs to be the least disruptive one. That's the part I didn't expect. The realization that many of the things we keep using aren't necessarily the ones we love the most. They're the ones that are hardest to replace. And once a system reaches that point, it doesn't need to improve. It just needs you to keep going along with it. And once you see how easy it is to stay inside one of these systems, it becomes harder not to notice that this isn't just happening once, it's happening everywhere. That was the moment everything clicked for me. Not when I understood one app or one company, but when I realized I was seeing the same story play out over and over again. Different products, different industries, different promises, but somehow the same ending. It always begins with something genuinely useful, something that solves a real problem in your life, something that feels like progress. And for a while it is. It gives you time back, it simplifies decisions, it removes effort. But then slowly, almost invisibly, that relationship changes. Not because the product stops working, but because the system behind it starts asking a different question. Not how do we help the user, but how do we sustain and grow this machine? And those are not the same question. What unsettled me wasn't that companies want to make money. That's expected. It was realizing how consistent the pattern is once certain incentives take over. Growth has to continue, revenue has to increase, expectations have to be met. And when those pressures build, the system adapts in predictable ways. It doesn't collapse, it evolves. But it evolves in a direction that slowly shifts value away from the user, even while everything on the surface still looks functional. The interface still works, the service is still available. But the experience feels different in a way that's hard to explain unless you've lived through it. And once you recognize that pattern, you start seeing it beyond apps, in services that get more expensive without becoming better, in products that become more complicated over time, in systems that feel like they're asking more from you than they used to. And that's when the perspective shifts. You stop asking, why is this getting worse? And start asking, what is this system optimized for now? Because once the answer is no longer you, everything else starts to make sense. And maybe that's the most important part of all this. Not that things change, but that they change in ways that are surprisingly predictable once you know where to look. So the next time something you use starts to feel worse, more expensive, more complicated, less intuitive, it might not be random. It might not even be poor decision-making. It might just be the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. attract you with something great, keep you through convenience, and then gradually shift once you're inside. That doesn't mean every platform is doomed, but it does mean that understanding the pattern gives you an advantage. Because once you see it, you can make more intentional decisions about where you spend your time, your money, and your attention. If this makes you think differently about your daily apps, leave a comment and let me know which app you feel has changed the most. And subscribe to Money Patterns if you want more analyses like this.